There are innumerable brilliant love tales in Hollywood, but there is one that is both romantic and haunting. It is a romance that lasted for more than 20 years, but was never able to find a conclusion that was satisfactory to both parties. Diane Keaton and Al Pacino. Two cinematic giants who will forever be connected to The Godfather are the protagonists of this love tale. However, their souls were never able to fully meet at the same point in time. Diane Keaton, a muse who was fiercely bold, independent, and funny, presented Al Pacino with a marriage proposal because she was so much in love with him. And Pacino, the man with beautiful eyes and a heart that may change at any moment, made the decision to walk away without uttering a single word. There was a time when they lived together, when they exchanged quiet vows, and when they brought each other tears. But in the end, each of them decided to go their own ways. There was no wedding, no conclusion. There was only a peculiar relationship that continues to this day. If you have ever been the admirer of Diane Keaton, who is a symbol of intelligence and independence, or if you have ever been attracted by the rebellious stare of Al Pacino, then please comment one below and join us in discovering the narrative that behind the spotlight. As well as a split that was never quite final, there was a love that was never mentioned. What kind of pain did Diane Keaton experience? And what prevented Al Pacino, the guy who had once declared, "I love you forever," from being able to maintain his grasp on her? A love story of Diane Keaton and Al Pacino. To understand why Diane Keaton and Al Pacino never had a complete ending, we must look back to a time long before they met, to the childhood years and artistic journeys that quietly shaped how they loved and how they let go. In Los Angeles, Diane Keaton was born into a family that adhered to the strict Catholic faith. Her father worked as a civil engineer, and her mother, Dorothy, was once the winner of a beauty competition in her village. However, she chose to devote her entire life to being a mother instead of pursuing her ambition of being a stage actress. Over the course of her childhood, Diane seen a dazzling lady who was confined to a kitchen, and she vowed that she would never live a life like that. Beginning at a very young age, Diane made the conscious decision to be a free woman who was unique, courageous, and so aggressive that many men considered her to be terrifying. Diane was susceptible as a result of the painful shadow that was cast by her mother throughout her life. She yearned for a love that was whole, not a love that came and went, but rather a love that had the courage to remain as it was. Within the realm of artistic uncertainty, a feeling of certainty, a home, and a relationship are all essential, which is precisely what she discovered, or at least what she believed she discovered in Al Pacino's eyes. The account that Al Pacino told, on the other hand, was quite different. The Italian-American family that he was born into was impoverished, and he was born in East Harlem, New York. When he was just 2 years old, his parents went through a divorce. Rose, the mother of the child, brought him up by herself while working part-time jobs in a tiny apartment in the Bronx. Pacino never had a family that modeled his own. On the contrary, he spent his childhood surrounded by the bustle of city streets, historic movie theaters, and little theaters, which is where he first had a sense of belonging. His love for the theater began at a young age, but over the course of his life it was the only thing he ever committed himself to. While Pacino was trying to maintain his acting career, he was kicked out of school, worked as a cinema usher, delivered newspapers, and even slept in parks and parks. He developed a shell as a result of his survival in that environment. Even though he was kind, he was not approachable. Deep, but not very close. Above all else, he was terrified of becoming attached, due to the fact that Pacino believed that connection equaled the loss of independence. Freedom, on the other hand, was the one thing that he believed could keep him alive. Two people, one of whom is desperate to keep their grip, and the other of whom is only able to run. Both of them are in love, but none of them is able to love without causing unnecessary pain to themselves. Not only were they two young actors cast in a masterpiece when they first met on the set of The Godfather in 1971, but they were also two young talents. The two spirits who had been estranged from the concept of redemption for a considerable amount of time suddenly recognized one another in a glance. Nevertheless, there are occasions when fate offers people hope just to destroy them with it. During the production of The Godfather in 1971, Diane Keaton and Al Pacino had their first encounter with one another. Both of these individuals were not well known at the time. Keaton was a humorous actress who worked independently, whereas Pacino was a newcomer who had just emerged on the stage of Broadway. There was a gentle beginning to something that occurred as their eyes met in the midst of the pressure cooker atmosphere of a classic mafia picture, a Hollywood romance. There was a connection between them that was both powerful and delicate, as if fate had begun scripting a different story for them beyond the frame of the camera. Throughout the course of several interviews, Diane Keaton has confessed that she fell in love with Pacino from the very beginning. "I was really obsessed with him," she added. Both charming and witty he was. His conversation was non-stop and he was eerily gorgeous. Something about him made me feel like I was looking at a lost child or a mad genius, and I couldn't help but stare at him. Pacino, on the other hand, did not make many statements. He never brought his feelings for Keaton to the attention of the public at any point in time. On the other hand, everyone who sees the film from behind the scenes or listens to the accounts of their friends might experience emotions. Nothing could adequately describe the energy that existed between them. It was not only a matter of professional concord or physical attraction. Rather, it was a gravitational pull that none of them could adequately understand. Over the course of the 1970s, they loved, broke up, and returned to each other again as if neither of them could really let go of the other. Their love began in silence, gradually developing as they proceeded through The Godfather Part 2, then Part 3. In addition, at that period of time, Diane Keaton started to comprehend. There was more to her feelings for Pacino than simply a simple crush at a young age. It was a mild fixation, the kind that made her willing to wait for more than 20 years only to get an answer to her question. But it's possible that response never materialized, and the most terrible aspect was that Pacino was aware of it. On the other hand, he did not change. He continued to be profound, fascinating, and remote, and he never committed to anything. To a greater extent than anything else that transformed everything into a relentless pursuit, with Diane being the one who was always the one doing the pursuit. There was no other Hollywood romance quite like the one that existed between Diane Keaton and Al Pacino. The public did not become aware of it immediately. There were no images of the couple on the red carpet, nor were there any formal announcements of their engagement. And yet it continued to exist for more than 20 years in a manner that was both peaceful and chaotic, like a tune that had no final note playing, then fading, and then beginning again. When they had finished working together on The Godfather, for the first time they started dating in secret. At times when they were not together, Keaton was involved in other relationships. In the past, she has dated Warren Beatty and even Mel Gibson in addition to living with Woody Allen. On the other hand, Pacino was the part of her heart that she could never forget. One day, she made the statement that the three Godfathers were all about the same thing, and that was Al. It was as easy as that to implement. Over the course of this time, Al Pacino continued his practice of avoiding commitment. Every one of his relationships, including the one he had with Diane, was plagued with disintegration. They went through a number of breakups and then got back together each time, believing that it would be the final time they would be together. The people who worked in the business frequently stated that Keaton was the only one who has the patience to remain, the gentleness to calm Pacino when he was feeling tight, the wisdom to refrain from exerting pressure on him, and the love to wait for something that she knew might never arrive. In the late 1980s, when they were in Rome filming The Godfather Part 3, they had a turning point in their relationship. Over the course of their stay at the same villa, everyone in the vicinity was under the impression that Pacino would eventually make the proposal, that after all those years, he would finally propose to Keaton. But the truth turned out to be quite different. Diane presented him with a choice: either they get married, or both of them die. It was not Al Pacino who selected her. The narrative did not conclude with a tense confrontation, but rather with a shocking lack of sound. During the time that Diane was attending therapy, she was informed that her father had a brain tumor. At the same time, Pacino silently walked out, never looking back. Diane slipped into darkness. She just responded by saying, "I kept asking things of him. When she was questioned about such a scenario, I yearned for more." In the same manner that I loved him, I desired for him to love me. That, in fact, was the tragic event. To love someone excessively is often all that is necessary to cause them to go. To put it another way, if the love that Diane Keaton and Al Pacino had were a piece of music, it would be a solo. A piece of music in which just one performer continues to play without stopping, while the other performer quietly exits the stage. Keaton was the one who always pushed forward, who hoped and who was ready when it came to this connection, especially when it was at its most profound level. And despite the fact that he was grateful and moved, Pacino remained the one who stood motionless and let love pass him by. One time, Diane referred to Pacino as a great person who had lost his way. A clever and charismatic man who was full of paradoxes and who never allowed anyone to get too close to him while he was around. Her description of him included the phrases gorgeous, genius, fool, and the most beautiful face I've ever possessed. On the other hand, none of those words were sufficient to bind a heart that had never been prepared to be bound. Not because Pacino did not love, but rather because he did not believe in a conclusion that might convince him to remain in a relationship he did not get married. When asked about it in a subsequent interview, Diane revealed that she had always chosen the wrong man. I required the same amount of assistance that they required from me. On the other hand, this is never a recipe for a relationship that will stay. She was aware that she lacked the inclination to nurture others and that she was not stable enough to satisfy the requirements of a perfect life mate. However, what she failed to recognize was that the most severe wounds were inflicted by her excessive love for the things she loved. Oh, and Pacino, on no occasion did he wed anyone. He was married to 3 separate women and had 4 children with each of them, yet he never put a ring on anyone's finger. It was stated by friends that Pacino was terrified of losing his independence and that he was plagued by the idea that marriage would destroy something that was breathtaking. It's also possible that he was aware of the fact that he couldn't love someone to the extent that he could commit to them, or that he couldn't love someone in a way that was considered normal. Diane Keaton was unable to maintain her connection with the guy she loved for the 20 years that they were together. Pacino, on the other hand, was never able to hold a woman's heart for a sufficient amount of time to create anything that would stay. Both of them were unsuccessful, albeit in different ways. Furthermore, in the end, when love was rejected, the one who remained behind was the one who was responsible for everything. It was a wound that Diane took into her positions. Women who were self-sufficient, humorous, and unrestricted, yet who always exuded a sense of quiet loneliness. Al Pacino was the one who carried that void onto the greatest platforms. Even at this late stage in his life when he is in his 80s, he does not fully belong to anybody. Diane Keaton and Al Pacino's love story came to an end without the involvement of a third party, without any issues of controversy, and without the filing of divorce papers. One person withdrawing from the relationship due of apprehension about making a commitment, and the other person ultimately deciding to quit. Daniel Keaton's struggles and Al Pacino's decision. But the true question continued to linger even after the lights were turned down and the ovation subsided. In the end, who of them lived their lives to the fullest? Following the conclusion of her final relationship with Pacino, Diane Keaton never dated anybody else in public. Even though she is well into her 50s, she has been a single woman for more than 35 years and has adopted 2 children, a girl and a boy. During one of the interviews, she admitted that no one had ever asked her to marry anybody. It's possible that they got the idea that I'm not the easiest person to coexist with. At the same time, she is the one who asserted unequivocally, I am extremely relieved that I did not get married. In my opinion, it would not have been appropriate for me to do so. Despite the fact that she did not have a male companion, Diane Keaton went on to become one of the most successful women in Hollywood. As a recipient of the Academy Award, the Golden Globe, and the American Film Institute, she became a symbol of mature beauty, incisive intelligence, and distinct uniqueness. She was also recognized by the American Film Institute. She never lost her sense of humor or her self-belief, despite the fact that she had been injured by love in the past. In addition, what about Al Pacino? the individual to whom Keaton had previously proposed. Despite the fact that he has never tied the knot, he is the father of 4 children from 3 separate women. The only one of those relationships that lasted for more than a few years was the one with Beverly D'Angelo, which resulted in the birth of twins named Anton and Olivia. All of the others beginning with Martha Keller and ending with Lucilla Polak, and most recently Noor Alfallah, the mother of his youngest kid who was born in 2023, ended up passing away like a succession of incomplete film sequences. Pacino famously responded in a low voice to the question of why he had never married by saying, "I avoid doors that might lead to pain." Although it is a simple statement, it is eerie. He may have been aware that he was unable to make someone happy, and as a result he made the decision to keep everything at a safe distance. Keaton has chosen to be alone. Pacino opted for a non-attachment mode. However, just one person has cried in front of a therapist for a love that was never able to materialize into reality. And there was only one person who stepped on stage in front of thousands of viewers and declared, "I love you forever." This was done in the midst of acclaim from a complete industry. One possible winner, if there is one, is the one who was able to maintain their own identity throughout the ordeal. A romance love story. However, the person who suffered the most was the one who loved the most. The world of show business is a loud and transient place, and it is quite uncommon for a relationship to go from being passionate to being heartbroken, and then gradually develop into something that is founded on profound respect and a connection that lasts. On the other hand, Diane Keaton and Al Pacino were able to do this. The two of them were no longer romantically involved, nor were they friends in the traditional sense. They were the only people who had personal experience with a chapter that no one else could ever fully comprehend. Moreover, their friendship for some inexplicable reason continued to be strong, as if there had never been a genuine breaking point between them. In 2017, Al Pacino made his debut on the stage during the presentation of the American Film Institute's Lifetime Achievement Award, which was presented in recognition of Diane Keaton. It had been close to 30 years since they had last loved one another by that point. On the other hand, Pacino's eyes seemed to be able to erase time that night. He talked about the times when Keaton made him laugh before interviews, recollections from Rome, and behind-the-scenes pieces that only the two of them had shared. After coming to the conclusion of his remarks, he took a little pause as if to take a breath, and then proceeded to declare in front of the entire audience, "I love you forever." Diane Keaton smiled, without dropping a tear, maybe because she had already shed enough tears to satisfy her emotional needs. Their friendship is not something that is frequently reported in the media. No photographs have been taken of the two of them strolling red carpets or going out to dinner together. Nevertheless, when they are interviewed, both of them continue to talk about each other in the most loving terms. Keaton had remarked that Pacino had the most stunning appearance of anyone she had ever encountered. Keaton was described by Pacino as a lady who was unlike any other, constantly surprising and always alive. It's possible that when love is no longer sufficient to cause someone to remain in a relationship, friendship becomes the only option to avoid losing each other totally. That is the option that they went with. Not to do each other harm again, not to return, and not to attempt to ignore the events of the past. They allowed each other to move on with their lives, yet they never stopped being in each other's hearts. Love came to an end. However, Diane Keaton and Al Pacino never actually parted ways with one another. Despite appearances, Diane Keaton and Al Pacino's relationship is more than just a tale of a failed romantic engagement. It is a manifestation of a more widespread tragedy that has occurred over generations. In a society where there is no place for compromise, when two individuals who are too special, too independent, and too ambitious try to love each other, they put themselves in a difficult situation. Artists. Keaton and Pacino are both driven by their inner lives and the emotional scars they experienced as children. Having been brought up in a household in which her mother was a driven and ambitious woman who was never given the opportunity to shine, Keaton carried with her a lifelong passion to demonstrate her worth not just in the realm of art, but also in the realm of personal identity. Despite her desire to be sincerely loved, she dreaded being mediocre and hated being forced to submit to authority. On the other hand, Pacino seemed to be the complete opposite. He was reared in poverty in the Bronx and wandered the streets of New York City in search of theatrical parts due to the fact that he was fatherless from a young age. Love, in his view, was always something that had the potential to interfere with his freedom. It was a price that was too expensive for a type of stability that seemed foreign to his existence. Within the context of their relationship, Keaton was the one who envisioned a home, whereas Pacino envisioned a feeling of disconnection. I liked Pacino not for who he was, but for what he symbolized, which was a lost soul that needed to be saved, is something that Keaton stated at one point. Pacino, despite the fact that he placed a high value on Diane, never expressed a willingness to alter his behavior and never reached a point when love appeared to justify the loss of a portion of himself. On the one hand, art drew them closer together, but on the other, it was art, namely their preoccupation with Roll's jobs and creative freedom, that eventually kept them apart. Every one of them made the decision to proceed on along their own individual path. She was never dependent on a man to complete her, and as a result, Diane became a symbol of autonomous femininity. That a great love does not always go hand in hand with a great career, that some people are born to love each other deeply, but are never meant to live together, and that Pacino became more withdrawn and free to the point of solitude, a man who belonged only to the screen. And perhaps that was a fate that both of them had long sensed, that Pacino was a man who belonged only to the screen. Diane Keaton and Al Pacino. Two living legends of Hollywood loved each other in a manner that very few others dared to, with honesty, with years of waiting, with inner loneliness, and with decisions that were agonizing. Still, they did not make any progress. The words, "I love you forever," was the only thing that remained when the wedding was over and the camera flashed. There was no happy ending. On the other hand, was it a genuine and profound love? Or was it really a dream that only Diane Keaton entered while Pacino chose to remain outside? If you loved someone so much that you were willing to propose to them and they left without saying a word, would you consider it to be love or a mistake? And if after more than 20 years that person continues to talk about you with tears in their eyes, was it completely genuine? Or was it just a matter of regret? They were not able to bond together. Nevertheless, they never let go of each other. Al Pacino has never been able to find someone who can take the place of Diane Keaton in his heart, and no one has ever been able to get Diane Keaton to talk as much in interviews, despite the fact that she has been unmarried for more than half of her life. There are some loves that do not require names, and there are certain ends that do not require marriages. However, there are also some aches that do not have a name because they never in fact finished and maybe never even started. Lasting love. Diane Keaton declared, "I love you, Al. I always have." She said it not in a scene from a movie, but during a live event decades after their romance had dimmed to a flicker. The audience laughed gently, thinking it was just one of her charming off-the-cuff remarks. But those who knew, those who understood, could hear the echo of something more serious in her voice, of a love that had once burned bright and still left ashes behind. In truth, Diane Keaton never truly fell out of love with Al Pacino. She simply outgrew the waiting. She outgrew the silences. And perhaps most heartbreakingly, she outgrew the hope that he would ever become the man she needed. Al Pacino, for all his brilliance, never learned how to arrive. He was always on the run from responsibility, from routine, from the finality of commitment. He was a wanderer with a heart too full of shadows, too full of past hurt, too afraid of being caged. To him, love was real, but permanence was a prison. Diane, on the other hand, had been raised with the fantasy of forever. Despite her independence and fierce feminism, there was a little girl in her who had watched her mother abandon her dreams for a husband and family, and who longed to find a balance her mother never could. She did not want to vanish into love. She wanted a love that could stand beside her. But Pacino, he only knew how to disappear into it or run from it entirely. They were always out of sync. When she was ready, he wasn't. When he looked back, she had already closed the door. And yet, they always managed to find each other again. A call, a meeting, A quiet look from across the room at some awards show or reunion. No new partner could erase the weight of that shared history. In interviews, Diane once said Al was simply uncatchable. You could be in his arms and still feel like you were 100 miles away. And that was the paradox. The more she loved him, the further he seemed to drift. But Pacino, for all his elusiveness, never truly let her go either. He has said little, if anything, about her in public. But there are whispers. Friends say he keeps old photos that he pauses when her films come on TV. They say that despite the women and the children, the parties and the accolades, he never stopped being haunted by what he couldn't give her. What they had was never simple. It was never tidy. But it was real. When Diane Keaton adopted her children Dexter and Duke, she did it without a partner. She did it not to replace love, but to create a different version of it. And in doing so, she proved that women like her, women with fierce hearts and sharp minds, didn't need marriage to find meaning. She gave herself the family she always longed for, but on her own terms. Pacino, meanwhile, remained adrift. His performances continued to be layered, brilliant, tortured, mirroring the very soul he kept hidden from those closest to him. Friends often noted that his real life seemed to take place only when he was acting. When the lights came down, he returned to solitude. To this day, when the name Diane Keaton is mentioned in his presence, he simply nods or smiles a wistful half-smile. And in that smile lives every unspoken apology, every missed opportunity, every almost. Because sometimes love stories don't need villains to break apart. Sometimes it's not betrayal or betrayal that ends a relationship, but timing, and fear, and the quiet realization that two people can be completely right for each other, and still not fit. Theirs was not a love that burned out quickly. It smoldered quietly, painfully for decades, and it leaves us wondering, would it have been better to have never loved at all? Or to have loved and lost something so rare? Diane Keaton once answered that question without even realizing it. In an interview late in her life, when asked about regrets, she paused and said, "I regret believing that love could save someone who didn't want to be saved." And in that sentence, you can hear the echo of 20 years spent loving a man who never knew how to stay. A man who perhaps loved her back more than he could admit, but less than she needed. Legacy of a lost love. Today, Diane Keaton is a legend. Oscar winner fashion icon. Symbol of individuality. Al Pacino remains a cinematic giant, still acting, still enigmatic. And yet, behind the fame and success, the echo of their love lingers. They didn't end in bitterness. They didn't break each other. They simply couldn't meet in the same emotional time zone. She needed roots, he needed wings. She gave her all, he gave what he could. And so their story remains suspended, not a romance, not a tragedy, but something in between. A reminder that sometimes the great loves in life are the ones that never quite become. Because not every love is meant to last. Some are meant to teach us what we need, even if we never get it. Their legacy was not a wedding ring or a shared home, but a kind of artistic and emotional entanglement that endured even when the romance didn't. Diane Keaton and Al Pacino created something more immortal than marriage. They built a myth, a story that still resonates not because it ended happily, but because it didn't. Because somewhere out there we've all been one of them, the one who waits, or the one who runs. And sometimes we are both. Do you think Diane made the right choice by never marrying? Or should she have fought for the love she lost? Like this video. If Diane Keaton's story touched you, comment your favorite Diane Keaton movie and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the hearts behind the headlines.